Morning, everyone. Great to see so many people here today. It's a very auspicious occasion. We welcome the Secretary of Energy, the Honorable Dan Brouillette. Welcome to the Atlantic Council for this timely conversation on the United States energy priorities abroad. My name is Jim Jones. I'm the Executive Chairman Emeritus of the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted to host at the Atlantic Council headquarters, for the first time since he took office, the 15th United States Secretary of Energy, Dan Brouillette. These past months have shown that energy remains a critical aspect and a critical component of our national security. They've also shown that the U.S. needs to continue to cooperate with our friends and allies around the world in order to promote energy access and security. And this makes the Secretary's presence and remarks here today all the more important. We are undergoing a shift in global energy markets. Global energy demand is rising. How we consume energy is changing, and new suppliers are coming online, reshaping the energy system in very, very profound ways. We would also do well to remember that geopolitics and energy are closely intertwined. Whether that be reducing Russia's intrusive influence in Eastern Europe through natural gas exports, or supporting sustainable energy and infrastructure development in Latin America as China expands its reach across the Pacific. Yet with our abundance of energy resources, the U.S. has changed the geopolitical landscape of the energy sector in just the past few years and is now a dominant player on the globe. As the President mentioned during his State of the Union address earlier this week, the United States is now a net oil and gas exporter. What a difference in just a few short years. Meanwhile, U.S. technology continues to push the envelope of improvements in efficiency and safety, whether it be in increasing energy efficiency and supporting renewables, improving nuclear energy safety, or helping to decarbonize the oil and gas sector. The U.S.'s role as an energy and energy technology exporter has provided a deeper toolbox of policy options to reach our foreign policy goals. And this is why it's of the utmost importance that we work together to use these energy resources productively and expand energy partnerships around the world. I'm personally, and on behalf of the Atlantic Council, we're all very, very thankful to have had the opportunity to work with the Secretary throughout his tenure at the DOE towards that goal, whether that be ongoing work through the 3 Cs initiative or our recent collaboration with DOE on a new U.S. energy strategy for the Western Hemisphere, which we will be very excited to roll out this spring. Secretary Brouillette is a close friend, and I'm proud of his accomplishment at the Department of Energy, both as Deputy Secretary and in such a short time thus far as Secretary. The Secretary will provide some remarks for us this morning, followed by a moderated conversation between him and Atlantic Council President and CEO Fred Kempe. Mr. Secretary, welcome back from your trip and welcome to the Atlantic Council. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Secretary of Energy, the Honorable Dan Brouillette.
Thank you, General. I appreciate that. Thank you for that kind introduction. You are indeed a close friend, and I treasure it. We've had some really good conversations, both here and at the Munich Security Conference and all around the world, really. Abu Dhabi, you name it. But thank you for your support. Thank you for your friendship. It's great to be back here at the Atlantic Council for today's discussions on energy priorities all across the world. And today I want to focus my remarks on our energy policy on both sides of the Atlantic. And since I've just returned from Brazil, an important dialogue there, and we'll soon leave for meetings in Europe, I want to say a few words about each one of those trips. And then I look forward to a follow-up discussion with Fred up here. I know he has some really hard questions for me, so I'm looking forward to that. But let me set the stage first by summarizing the U.S. energy landscape, as the General just alluded to, and its implications for our energy policies well beyond our borders. As you know, in the span of a very few years, short years, the United States has gone from an energy-dependent country, one that was prone to energy shortages, to an energy-independent nation and with a new ability to share our abundance all throughout the world. It's a fantastic transformation of our country. I was with a group yesterday, and I was sharing some of my personal experiences. I'm old enough to remember gas lines here in the United States. I grew up down in Louisiana, an oil and gas producing state, and I remember distinctly, as a young guy sitting in the back seat of my dad's car, asking him, "Dad, why are we in line for gas? We live in Louisiana. Gas is everywhere. You know, we're supposed to have a lot of this stuff, right?" And to go from that to 2020, where the United States will be a net energy exporter, is just remarkable. To go from gas lines to being the #1 oil producer in the world, larger than Saudi Arabia, larger than Russia, is just stunning. And it really has been transformational. So the fundamental question then is what sparked that transformation? And I think if we were to boil it down and state it very simply, it's to look and recognize that following a very long struggle between innovation and regulation, innovation is winning the day. That's what's happening. Why? That's what's happening here in America. And that's why, under this administration's leadership, and that's not to sound partisan, we are building on efforts that began under previous administrations. We've removed many of the more draconian regulations on energy, and we've made innovation the cornerstone of our energy policy, because we feel strongly that it's because of innovation the United States is now the second largest generator of wind and solar power as well. So it's not just about oil and gas, it's about renewable energy as well. Thanks to innovation, we are now, as I just mentioned, the world's largest producer of both oil and natural gas, which we are seeking tremendous markets for all around the world. And again, thanks to innovation, we're reviving two of the world's most reliable 24/7 generators of electricity, and that's nuclear and coal. And to further that innovation, today I'm announcing that we're going to release $64 million in federal funding for research and development under what we refer to as our Coal First initiative. Coal First is going to help us produce more coal-based power more efficiently and transform it into a near zero emissions energy source for not only our country, but the rest of the world as well. And that's on top of a $100 million announcement we just made for solar this week. Point there is that we're going to continue this all of the above strategy that we have undertaken. But by any measure, our ongoing energy innovation progress, both at the department and within private industry, is absolutely transformational. It strengthens, as the General alluded to, our energy security. It improves our economic security. Costs have fallen, jobs have risen, and opportunity is flourishing all across. It bolsters as well our national security by freeing us and our partners from unstable and often unfriendly foreign suppliers. And it's transforming hemispheric security and transatlantic security, providing opportunities for peace, for prosperity, for freedom, as we export our energy bounty, our energy technology, and our energy know-how. When it comes to energy security, we're pursuing a bedrock philosophy of our administration. We believe that in order to have a more secure and a more prosperous world, we must encourage more free, transparent, rules-based markets within countries, and to replicate these fundamental values around the globe to enhance commerce among these countries. And that's why we support the emergence of a free and democratic Venezuela in this hemisphere. And it's why we're strengthening our partnerships with hemispheric neighbors like Brazil and with the democracies, economies, and energy sectors of Eastern Europe. It's why we're exporting our LNG to 37 countries, 8 of which are located right here in this hemisphere. And it's why we're urging countries across the world to embrace freedom and transparency so that they can attract private investment they need for vital energy infrastructure. And it's why we've accepted the challenge of developing a Western Hemisphere energy strategy, which was launched right here at the Atlantic Council, to give us a modern blueprint for supporting energy projects all across the Americas. And it's why we also launched the Partnership on Transatlantic Energy Cooperation, or PTEC, as it's known more informally, to bring together the reformers, the innovators, and the policymakers from 24 Central and Eastern European nations to chart a bold course for growth, for security, through energy development and diversification. It was also precisely this philosophy that led President Trump to invite President Bolsonaro of Brazil to the White House in March of just last year, where they announced a brand new framework of energy cooperation, and we call it the U.S.-Brazil Energy Forum, or USBEF, as I learned down in Rio last week. I was there last Monday, and I had the privilege of co-chairing the very first meeting of this organization. And this is a relationship that I think exemplifies the bold new frontier for our own hemisphere's integration, its independence, and ultimately its prosperity. From oil and gas to civil nuclear energy to power to energy efficiency, the dialogue that we had with my counterpart, Minister Bento, was both extensive and illuminating. And coupled with that visit and coupled with those conversations the day before on Sunday, the Nuclear Energy Institute, NEI, held an energy roundtable in Rio. And at that roundtable, we focused on the U.S.-Brazil nuclear energy cooperation, which includes support for U.S. companies obtaining full, effective access to Brazil's market for this essential fuel source. And, you know, what is true of Brazil is true, I think, across much of our hemisphere. From the pre-salt drilling in Brazil to unconventional gas projects in Argentina, to the potential development of renewables in Colombia and Chile. The Americas present incredible opportunities for nations to work together and to develop energy resources. We can work together to achieve energy security, and we can work together to foster economic growth. Let me add that I'll be emphasizing that very same philosophy of freedom, transparency, commerce, and cooperation when I travel next Sunday to Europe. I'll be visiting 3 countries there, Austria, Portugal, and Germany. In Vienna at the International Conference on Nuclear Security, I'll reaffirm the need for cooperation amongst nations to ensure that nuclear power is harnessed for peaceful and productive purposes. I will also reiterate the administration's position that we must not and we will not allow Iran to obtain nuclear capabilities. We're committed to nonproliferation and will continue to work with the IAEA and our global partners to keep Iran in line and to seek a Middle East that embraces mutual respect for all of its neighbors. I think dealing with bad actors like Iran highlights what an incredible game changer, as the General alluded to in his opening comments. Our energy independence is for us and for our allies. With U.S. energy production now at record levels, the world is no longer subject to the will of countries who seek to do us harm. And this has revolutionized our foreign policy, and it frees us to pursue options that we've not had, at least in my lifetime. In Lisbon, Portugal, I'll visit the LNG port of Sines with my Portuguese counterparts and members of the American private industry. And there I'll stress the importance of such infrastructure to bringing America's LNG and its abundance to Europe, which provides alternatives to Russian gas. The Port of Sines received its very first shipment of U.S. LNG to Europe back in April of 2016, and as of November of last year, we've sent Portugal 26 cargoes, which totals approximately 83 BCF of natural gas. And we hope to increase this amount as my department approves new LNG export facilities here in the United States. Today, Portugal wants to expand that port's infrastructure and perhaps look beyond that for other infrastructure, and that's a move that we strongly support. Nevertheless, as excited as we are about their desire to do that, we are somewhat concerned that Portugal might accept investments from Beijing under its infamous Belt and Road Initiative, becoming perhaps the latest geopolitical trophy of China and President Xi as he seeks to project the Chinese worldview upon the global community. And so while I'm in Portugal, I will communicate those concerns to my counterparts there as well as to the Prime Minister. From Portugal, I will leave and I'll go to Munich, where I'll join the Munich Security Conference. And I will again stress our support for the cooperative transatlantic efforts like the 3 Cs initiatives and PTEC. And in fact, I know I'll see some of you at the Munich Security Conference, because at the last two, you guys were very much at the forefront of many of the conversations that occurred there. My message at the MSC is going to be very clear. In Europe, as much as anywhere in the world, energy security is in fact national security, and energy security depends upon energy diversity. The fact is, and it remains, that many European countries are dependent on Russian gas to meet more than 75% of their annual gas imports. And given Russia's use of energy to bend other nations to its will, those nations must diversify. Thankfully, I think the United States is offering a compelling answer, greater energy choice for Europe through our LNG exports, and we are not limiting their choices to U.S. LNG, but we have encouraged them to build LNG export facilities to expand their infrastructure so that they can share energy more freely. But our LNG exports to Europe have increased, and they've increased dramatically. In fact, since July of 2018, our exports to Europe have risen nearly 600%. That's not a Department of Energy number, that's an EU number that was given to us. So that's an astounding increase in the amount of LNG that is being shipped to the EU from the United States. But there is still, as I mentioned, some missing links here. Roughly 40% of the EU's LNG regasification capacity can't be accessed by their neighboring countries or their neighboring member states. We'd like to see them expand their infrastructure internally so that they can more easily move that energy across the European Union. And that's why we're offering to support their efforts to diversify that energy infrastructure. Through PTEC and through the 3Cs initiative, the United States will mobilize technical expertise from each one of our programs in the Department of Energy and help Europe create a better environment to attract what we feel is the investment that they need to build this new infrastructure. So I guess in summary, make no mistake about this. I mean, America's energy success story means the transformation of both sides of the Atlantic, and indeed the world, in truly, I think, truly wonderful ways. It's an exciting time to be in the energy space. It's an exciting time to be at the Department of Energy. It's an exciting time to work with partners like you as we look forward to this bold new world. Thanks again for the opportunity to be with you this morning to sort of sum this all up, and I look forward to the questions that Fred is going to attempt to pin me down with. So thank you for the opportunity to be here with you. How you doing, Fred?
I'm all right, Mr. Secretary. What an honor to have you here.
It's great to be here.
And great to be here. And to be here in your new capacity. We've really enjoyed working with you around the world. And I do want to salute General Jones, which I find myself doing quite a bit, both for his service to our country and for the Atlantic Council, and also thank Randy Bell and his team at the Global Energy Center.
Absolutely.
So this was really a powerful speech and hit a lot of things. As you know, I'm a recovering journalist from the Wall Street Journal, and you did make a little news with the $64 million of federal funding for Coal First. And so why don't we start there? Because there is a debate on, whether coal has a part in the future at all. Obviously, you've said it does, and how far this technology has gone. Right. So obviously, you're focusing on decarbonization. Everyone's focused on decarbonization. Where are we in the technology? Where do you hope this new funding will take us? Is the breakthrough there? Is the Holy Grail there?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if I go so far as to say it's the Holy Grail, but boy, we're going to work hard to find it. And that's what we're trying to do with this Coal First program. So we think, if coal plants are made smaller, more efficient, it's easier to make them cleaner in some respects. The efficiency numbers become key for the decarbonization efforts we have underway. You're well aware of some of the other programs that we have at DOE around CCUS and carbon capture and those types of technologies. As we look down the road, though, we look at developing nations, coming online. We still see them using coal. We don't see that going away. So we're committed to finding export opportunities for our coal miners here and our coal units, our coal industries here. But we want to see that product being used, if it's going to be used for electricity generation, we want to see it be used as cleanly as possible. So we're also going to export and continue to make CCUS more economic so that they can be exported together. When I was in Japan just recently, many of you may have traveled and seen the Isogo coal facility there. It's a giant coal generation facility. It is literally within eyesight of residential neighborhoods. There's a lot of commercial activity there as well. But the carbon emissions from that facility is lower in certain cases than some of the combined cycle gas units here in the United States. And I think it's an indication that you can use this cleanly if you want to use it for electricity generation. We just have to continue to develop the technology that allows us to do that. The second part of coal, though, part of the message is coal can be, in some respects, or we hope, at least we'll find out the answer to it, a source of critical minerals for us and a source of rare earth elements, which leads us to better battery storage capabilities, which allows us to bring even more renewables online. So what we're going to do as the research arm of the U.S. government, or as a science department, if you will, is continue to look for those types of opportunities. I don't think no one is going to deny the fact, no one's going to argue with the point that coal as a percentage of U.S. electricity generation is declining and will probably continue to decline for some time. The efforts that we're undertaking is not to subsidize the industry and preserve their status, if you will, as a large electricity generator. It is simply to make the product cleaner and to look for alternative uses for this product or this commodity. That's our aim.
Very interesting. In terms of international partners, I mean, who is going to be most important for you in this respect?
With regard to coal?
With regard to coal.
So I think you're going to look for purposes of export opportunities. Asia, in particular, has been a strong customer. That's why the USMCA was so important. We hope to work more collaboratively with both Mexico and Canada to find export facilities to get the coal from places like Wyoming and out in the western part over to Asia, because there's a very, very strong demand for coal. And in certain parts of Africa, we're seeing very strong demand. So the East Coast coal miners and the East Coast coal industry have export opportunities as well as some areas in Eastern Europe as well.
Great, thank you. It really was a very rich speech. Innovation is winning the day. The Coal First talk, a really rich discussion of what happened in Brazil, Latin America, and also Europe. So there's a lot to cover here, and particularly the comments you made about Europe. But let's start with something you touched on a little bit, that you didn't touch upon, which is coronavirus.
Sure.
And it's already had an impact on demand. My guess is it will have an impact on U.S. production and demand for U.S. production. We saw a global slowing in any case.
Sure.
Has knock-on impact on LNG markets. My guess would be. How are you looking at this as you analyze this? What could it change in the short term, or what longer-term implications might it have?
Well, I think it's important for us to closely evaluate China's response. If they are able to contain the virus, perhaps you won't see quite the slowdown that people are anticipating. If it does continue, if it creates the contagion, and it moves across China as well as around the world, then obviously we're going to be concerned about Chinese economic growth. But at this point in time, I think what they're doing seems to strike us as appropriate. And I'm not commenting on the tactical methodology of how they do it, but they seem to be able to have some understanding and control over the virus, or at least the initial efforts have been successful. What we're seeing right now, is going to be what does the rest of the world do? Do we slow down flights? Do we stop flights altogether? Right now we have some limited measures in place, a 14-day notification or a 14-day disclosure period and all that. If flights stop altogether, then obviously you start to see the secondary effects, demand of jet fuel, that affects the energy pricing around the world as well. The other important component here is going to be, what does OPEC decide to do in the next few days? My understanding is that they're going to meet to discuss this issue. I think their decision is going to have an impact across the world. I don't think that it's going to be a dramatic impact. As I've said in the past, OPEC's posture within the oil market seems to be different than it was 40 years ago. So I think they may have, some decision made within the next 14 days that will lead us to understand clearly what the energy markets will do. But, long way around of saying right now, I think there's been some impact. I think the impact has been marginal. I don't think it's been dramatic at this stage. And we see that in oil pricing, and we see it in, the refined fuel pricing all across the world.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Your remarks referenced several regions, particularly Latin America and Europe, where the U.S. is taking on a considerable leadership role. You talked about your trip to Brazil, where you formally launched the Brazil Energy Forum. Described in your remarks what you plan to achieve regarding PTAC and 3Cs at the Munich Security Conference, et cetera. If you look at this in a broader scope of what this says about U.S. strategy in how to take advantage and make the best of the energy leadership position that we relatively newly have, how does this fit in? And are the things you're doing in Latin America and Europe applicable to other regions of the world? So in other words, are you creating models for others?
That's a good question. I think, let me take a step back. I mean, Brazil's had a long history with the United States, all the way back to the revolutionary days. And, when I was down there, it was very interesting to hear those stories and how their feelings toward the United States. My personal view is that we have a very strong ally in Brazil at this moment in time. So we have an opportunity to develop, a very strong partnership, particularly on energy. And the conversations demonstrated that. So, the conversations we had there focused on, they have 3 large nuclear facilities. The first one, Angra 1 is what it's called. They want to extend the life of it from 40 years to 60 years. They're very interested in having Westinghouse do that work for them, the relicensing and the license extensions that are necessary to do that. Very much looking forward toward a U.S. partner to do that. The last facility, Angra 3, is about 69-70% complete. They are also looking for U.S. partners to help complete that project. The point in all that is that they have the same values around nuclear that we have. So it creates an enormous opportunity for us, not only for economic opportunities for U.S. industry, but for our non-proliferation efforts as well. And if we can look for democracies like Brazil, for governments like Brazil that have similar values around nuclear security, around energy security, around diversification, those are partnerships we need to seek out and very aggressively, in my view. So whether it becomes a model, probably a little too early to tell, but we're excited about the progress we made.
And does the model that you're talking about have to do with the Section 123 agreement, which is the Brazil agreement since 1999? Right. But is that this MOU and that kind of agreement, is that what you could apply to other democracies?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Each one is a little different, and these things were negotiated many, many years ago, so the world was different back then. But I do think that those types of agreements can serve as models. But I just think more importantly, the partnership, the trust that we show each other, the interactions that we have themselves become, in some respects, a model that we can use across the world.
Thank you. You spoke of a transformational moment on both sides of the Atlantic. At the same time, you warned of Portugal potentially becoming and other places becoming trophies, geopolitical trophies of China, and the dangers of over-dependence on Russia. If you're looking at the trend lines, do you see them as positive in Europe, or do you see more a reason for concern because things are not moving rapidly enough?
I'm an Army guy, so we tend to try and do things yesterday. So we like to move things a little faster. I think, if you look at the trend line, there are some concerning trends. The recent decision by UK to allow Huawei to build at least a portion of its telecommunications network, I think some would argue is a concern. We can disagree on the facts, we can disagree on the particulars. We're pleased by the fact that they didn't allow them to build the entire network, but nonetheless, the fact that they will be a part of the network, it still represents a concern. Another concern I would point out would be that, I'm not quite sure countries are moving fast enough to develop investment screening programs. That's one of the conversations I'm going to be having in Portugal. We think it's important that people take the time to understand just who is investing, and not only look at the finances involved, look beyond that to see if there may be other motives, other reasons, or other attractions for those countries to want to invest in your company. Those are legitimate questions to ask. So I'd like to see them move a little faster to develop those types of programs.
So let me get a wee bit more specific on this regarding PTEC, 3Cs, other connections. You were kind enough to tip your hat to the Atlantic Council role in this, and I'll do the same with General Jones. For those in the audience who don't know this, the 3Cs initiative, which I think will have its 5th Leaders Summit this year, 4th or 5th, in Estonia in June. It has great ambition, not entirely fulfilled so far, to be honest.
Sure.
And the whole idea is starting with the 12 Central European members of the European Union, that you would build a north-south corridor with lots of infrastructure projects for energy, transportation, and digital and telecommunication. Do you feel that this can now get more traction than it's had so far? And if so, what would be the U.S. role in it? What might be the European Union role in it, the member country role? And how did this interact with PTEC?
Well, I'm hopeful that we can gain more traction. Having conversations with my colleagues in the interagency processes here, people like Kim Reed. Kim and I met recently at the Ex-Im Bank. The new DFC, the fact that Ex-Im is reauthorized, the fact that DFC has the ability to do some things we couldn't do with OPEC, OPEC just a few short years ago, I hope will produce tangible results for these countries. We are working very aggressively with private industry as well. I think the response has been good. I'd like to see it be stronger, to be honest. But we're going to continue the work. I mean, I am hopeful for it. I just want to see it move faster. I don't think we've moved as fast as I would have liked. But we're going to continue the progress. We're going to continue the good work.
The one question I've always loved to ask Secretaries of Energy, because you see things in the technological sphere that we don't. As you're seeing things bubble up, you talked about some of the issues that could have, some of the technologies that could have an impact on coal. What else gets you going? What else in the technological sphere do you look at and say, this is really exciting, this is really promising? If you're thinking of the top 2 or 3 technological innovations, you said we're a country of innovation. Which are the innovations that rock your boat?
Rock my boat. So there's a couple things we're working on at DOE, and one of them is very blue sky. I'm going to say it, but you guys are going to think I'm crazy when I do say it. Let me talk about that one later. The first one, and maybe I'll get out of here on a crazy note, but we're working very hard with some of our national laboratories in the middle part of the country. The University of Chicago helps us run our laboratories at Argonne and Fermi and Ames in that area. And we are, for the last 2 months, we have developed a quantum entangled internet that links the university with our laboratories. We have about 42 miles of closed loop quantum entangled internet. And if you think back to the days of DARPA, way back in the day, DOD, what we're trying to do is to create this very secure, very fast, closed-loop internet so that I can link the 17 laboratories of the U.S. Department of Energy together, including our weapons laboratories. And the way it works is, I'm not a quantum physicist, so forgive the simplified explanation, but if you put data in a qubit here, it can be immediately and instantaneously put in this qubit over here if it's in close proximity. So whatever you put here is automatically here. So there's no need for a line, and there's no need for encryption. There's no need for security. So you've done away in certain respects with all of the cybersecurity concerns that we might have. That's a very exciting world to live in. It's very fast and it's very secure. And if we can take that and expand it more broadly, it transforms everything we think about today in terms of telecommunications. So, perhaps 5G becomes a thing of the past. The concerns that we have about those things become a thing of the past. So that's a very exciting project. Again, we've got 42 miles of it today up in that region. We hope to expand it very, very shortly. The next step will probably be to look at places like Brookhaven in New York. Because of their proximity to Wall Street, we think we can perhaps create a similar type of network in that region, which, for the financial services community, becomes a game changer for them. Data breaches are a big deal if you're in the banking world. So if you can eliminate some of those security concerns, you've really taken a large step forward. The crazy idea that I was talking about earlier, someone at one of the laboratories mentioned to me that perhaps we can start to transmit or move electricity without wires. You think about that world. Think about moving electricity from the far west to New York City without transmission lines and without distribution lines into your homes. Think about the amount of money that perhaps we could save, the amount of, if nothing else, the reduction in legal fees trying to get permits and everything around the country. I think it's a very exciting, it's a blue sky project, but it's very exciting. And if we can do that, then perhaps we can challenge some of the infrastructure thinking here in the United States, but also think about what it means for the countries in Europe. What does it mean for our transatlantic partners? What does it mean for places like Africa? If they don't have to invest hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars in certain cases in transmission infrastructure, we can simply transport the electricity from the generator to the home without a wire. So,
wow. So that's pretty exciting. I'm sure that the audience would love to hear how close is this.
It's far away. it's blue sky, believe me. It's way out there.
It's way out there. So I know we're running out of time. I'm just going to ask you one more question, and,
Sure.
and thank you for spending this time. We know you have to run on to other things. And when we close, if you just hold your seats for a bit, because the secretary will have to leave after we applaud and thank him. As a longtime observer of energy markets, I've been absolutely shocked that we've had a hit on the major Saudi
Opec.
We've had the problems we've had in Venezuela. We've had the disappearance of Iranian oil, more or less. We've had so many hits that might have doubled prices in earlier ages. Now we have coronavirus. We're seeing the market adjust to that. Are we just in a different age where energy risk ought to be viewed differently with the swing producers in the U.S., or is there still something in all this that keeps you up late at night?
A couple things keep you up at night. It's usually called 9 kids. But, energy policy. Usually my kids are doing something at night. But energy policy doesn't keep me up at night. It is a fundamentally different world, though. It really is. I mean, you just mentioned the Opec facility. I might add to your list the events in Venezuela and other parts around the world. The fact of the matter is that the EIA tells me that we're going to produce 13 million barrels a day this year, 13 million barrels a day in 2020. And that number is going to go even higher in 2021. And, you're seeing the effect of that increased production on pricing. Now, some will argue that global demand is going down. Global demand for energy is actually going up. Global economic activity may be slowing, the growth may be slowing, but it's still growing. It's not in the decline. I mean, we're looking at roughly 1.5% to 2% growth versus, perhaps 3 or 4 that some people would say we should have. Those two things combined lead to a bright future in energy production, but it also adds stability. I mean, the fact that we are able to produce 13 million barrels a day here in the United States, and some estimates I've seen informally go as high as 15 or 16 million barrels per day. That extra capacity, that strength, if you will, in the marketplace, I think keeps oil prices stable for the foreseeable future, the next 2 to 3 years. Now, could we have some larger externality, larger than Opec, larger than Saudi? Perhaps. But for the near term, based on what we see in the marketplace, what we see around the world, I think we're looking at very, very stable pricing, for as far as we can see. That, as we talked about earlier, is just a fundamentally different place for the world to be, certainly for the United States to be in.
Mr. Secretary, what a rich conversation, rich opening remarks. Thank you so much, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Fred. Appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you.
That was great.
Appreciate that.